right, everybody, just logging into my computer there, but we can get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Transportation Standing Committee. It is nice of me to join you, Tony. Thanks for noticing that. I appreciate it. Walking a little slowly right now due to recovering from COVID. Took longer to walk down from Spring Garden than I expected. So we'll call this meeting to order. I'm going to start by recognizing that Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people, and the municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in the territories and recognizes that we are all treaty people. And to that end, I invite you all Monday, Councillor Smith, 10 o'clock, is it? I think it's, if not, we'll correct it later, but I'm pretty sure it's Monday, 10 o'clock. We're going to be renaming the street formerly known as Cornwallis to Nora Bernard. So I'd like to thank the members for their patience and all the members of council who came today to join us. And I'll move to our first order of business is the approval of the minutes. Moved by Councillor Cuddles, seconded by Councillor Purdy. Are there any questions about the minutes? Seeing none, we'll move to vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carries. Next, we'll go to approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Madam Clerk.
There are no additions or deletions from the clerk's office.
Thank you. Does anybody from council have anything they'd like to add or subtract? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to move the order of business. Moved by Councillor Lovelace, seconded by Councillor Cuddle. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? You have to vote, actually. I think Sean did, and Trish will call that approved. Thank you. Approval of the order of business and approval of additions, deletions. Did that. So we did minutes. Sorry, did I do minutes? We haven't done order of business yet? I've lost track. Did I do a motion on the minutes, I guess is the question. I did? Okay, all right. Business arising out of the minutes, there is none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. None. Motions of reconsideration, none. Motions of rescission, none. Consideration of deferred business, none. Notice of tabled matters, none. Correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Correspondence, Madam Clerk.
Correspondence has been received and circulated for item 12.1.2.
Thank you very much. Are there any petitions, Madam Clerk?
There are no petitions.
Do any members of the committee have any petitions? Seeing none. We'll move on to presentations. There are none. There is, however, public participation. First time this committee. It's been moved up to before the items brought forward and reports. So we have two people on the list right now. I'm not sure the pronunciation. Manirazaman. Did I get that anywhere near close? Come on down, sir, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and you'll have 5 minutes. We'd ask everybody who's going to present today, no cheering or booing or making it uncomfortable for anybody to speak or for anybody to be against what's being said. We just want to let everybody have a chance to speak. So if you come on down, they'll get the mic set up for you. And after him, we'll have Norm Collins from the Crosswalk Safety Society of Nova Scotia. You can sit right in the middle there if you want. Thank you. If you could state your name and community for the record.
Hello. Thank you. I'm MD Manirazaman. I'm second year master's student at St. Mary's University, studying in geography. It's my second year. I'm majoring in urban planning. I'm just here to see the planning process, how it happens, how the discussion's going on, and how the decision has been made. So nothing to say a specific agenda or any topic. So thank you so much for.
Oh, very good. So you signed into the meeting and we asked you to speak. That's excellent. Thank you for coming forward anyway. Next time you can just say, no, I don't actually want to talk, and that'd be fine too. But thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate coming today. And so that brings us to the next one, which is Norm Collins. Norm, I believe that you probably intended to speak, given past history, so come on down. Maybe. If you could state your name and community for the record. You have 5 minutes.
This one. Good. Thank you. Okay, my name is Norm Collins. I am the President Treasurer of the Crosswalk Safety Society of Nova Scotia, here to speak on the 2023 Strategic Road Safety Framework Annual Report. Good afternoon, and thank you for your time that you've taken to read the report, which was sent out both in August and I understand yesterday or this morning, along with this presentation. We presented the report as a report card in which you can see we believe there are many areas where expectations are not being met. We offer our observations not to be critical of effort, but rather the results, and to present to you that our society does not view the progress to be as rosy as we believe the report suggests. For example, during the development of the framework, of which I was a member, the fatal and injury collision reduction goal was specifically established as an absolute change. The issue of population growth was discussed and recognized in setting that absolute goal, and that's on page 5 of the framework. Yet the report, with no explanation, moves the goalpost by presenting improvement factoring in population growth. The improvement based on the specific goal in the framework is 2.4% rather than the 11.6% presented. We believe it is inappropriate and misleading to unilaterally move the goalposts in the middle of the game. While there has been progress on a number of emphasis areas, albeit with no indication as to why, not only has there been no improvement, but rather an increase in both pedestrian and bicyclist collisions and impaired driving. The fact the report does not focus on these poor results is disappointing. It is clear from the report a considerable amount of analysis has been completed, yet there is virtually no commentary as to what is going to be done. There continues to be no specific action plans to address these deteriorating, specifically these 3 deteriorating emphasis areas. Now a few comments on our report card. We applaud the road safety budgets have increased over the last number of years, but question where the funds are being spent. And this will be a recurring theme. For example, the evidence demonstrates that less than 10% of the fatal and injury collisions occur on roads eligible for traffic calming, yet over 50% of the budget is spent on these roads. The framework requires programs to be, and it says, expanded, contracted, or eliminated based on evidence. We are unaware of any evidence that justifies the current level of spending on traffic calming. Community engagement. While the recent creation of the Road Safety External Stakeholder Committee is appreciated and hopefully will be useful and productive, otherwise there's been effectively no community engagement as committed to in the framework. It is disheartening the community will not be involved in the next iteration of the strategy. This should be reconsidered. Education, we believe this has been a dismal failure. Heads Up Halifax was terminated with nothing taking its place. In spite of education being presented as a pillar of road safety, there's effectively no ongoing education of road safety. Enforcement, and this is thanks to the SOT information, no matter how one spins enforcement efforts, the data tells the story. Summary offense tickets are over 40% less than the baseline, 2018-19, and 60 to 70% less than 10 years ago. It is insulting to read how critical enforcement is to road safety, where attention to enforcement has actually been reduced rather than increased. Engineering, this is the one bright spot. To the credit of traffic management, a considerable number of countermeasures have been implemented. However, again, the report provides no indication as to any evaluation of the success or failures of these countermeasures, as required by the framework. Once again, traffic calming is an example where 3 out of 5.5 million was spent on, or will be spent on traffic calming this year, with no commentary as to the effectiveness of the investment. The report includes considerable data, but very little as to how the data is driving decisions and priorities. While data is, of course, important, frameworks or strategies or whatever one wants to call them need to be a call to action with clear actions to improve
30 seconds,
road safety. Unfortunately, this report still does not provide necessary action plans based on evidence of effectiveness. Reporting counts of what was done is simply not enough. As you consider the 24-25 budget, we trust you, the Budget Committee, and Regional Council will focus on funding being directed to countermeasures for which there is evidence of the most effectiveness as required by the framework. Look at that.
Are you okay? Do you need a second to recover? Okay, good. Thank you very much. I will indulge you with that. Yes, let's have the mic back.
I knew I was going to run out of time.
10 seconds.
I want to acknowledge that the report, we believe, has improved over the years. Things like the SOT data that's in there now is very welcome and good. And I also wanted to comment on the what we consider a very good relationship with traffic management. They listen to us, they're timely in their responses. We don't always agree, but we do appreciate their responsiveness to our inquiries and observations. Thank you for indulging.
Thank you for that, Norm. Always appreciate it. So we have 2 on the list right now. Remember, questions of clarification if we would, rather than debate. And we could certainly have an extensive debate here. We'll go to Councillor Outthit first.
Segue, I tell you. So thank you, Norm, for the presentation and also for your work with the flags and all the things you've done over the years. It always sort of strikes me strange, and I just wanted you to clarify this a little. So we don't put speed calming on some of the main arteries, the major collectors, et cetera, et cetera. Where we have put them, and I'm so pleased that we have done this around schools, around some of the areas in I'm speaking to my district, but around the schools, around the districts where, you know, because they're there, we may have prevented accidents. We may have prevented injuries. We may have prevented deaths. We may have, because they were traveling slower. We all know that the slower you're going, the least chance, you know, you're more likely to be injured rather than killed. So to say that we're putting speed calming where the accidents aren't happening is almost like the old argument we used to have about crosswalks. More people are hurt at marked crosswalks than they are, well, marked crosswalks are put in busy places where there's risk. So we put them there and we try and mitigate the risk. I'm just wondering, you know, we can't put speed bumps and narrows and necessarily narrowing streets and all the things we might like to on some of the major collectors, but I actually am quite pleased with what I'm seeing as speed calming in some of the streets that warranted and the fact that maybe we're preventing things around schools. So I wanted your clarification on it. It's almost like you're saying, thank you for doing speed calming, but you do it in the wrong places because it's not where the accidents are, but how do you know we're not preventing them?
Sure. Optically, speed calming is great. You know, I think if we had unlimited resources, I'd like to see speed calming everywhere.
As I would.
And, you know, I can't, I don't have any data or evidence to deny that they may have reduced, you know, collisions and or the seriousness of those collisions. But I think the question is, when you go back, I looked at all the streets in District 6 in 2018, and I got the data as to where the collisions, the injury collisions occurred, whether they were on the arterial or major collector, or whether they were on local or minor collector where you have speed calming. And it was about 9-to-1, okay? So the issue for us is, if you've got 90 injuries happening on this group of streets and only 10 there, where are you gonna get the biggest bang for your buck? The 10 might go down to 8, don't deny that, but what we need to do is get 90 to go down to 60. You know, save 30 collisions and all the injuries and health costs that, you know, are the consequence of those, as opposed to reducing it by 2. Yeah. So that's where the issue of it's in the wrong place.
My worry is the 10 or that could have gone up to 20 or 30 too. So anyway,
Questions of clarification, please.
Yeah. So I'm clarifying that I don't completely agree with that analysis, but I agree with you that we do need to look at the major ones as well. But I am happy with what we're doing around schools and whatnot. So just as long as that's clarified.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
We'll go to Councillor. That was very clear. We'll go to Councillor Purdy next.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Norm, I do agree with you, I think, on that. I know, I'm the oddball. I'm wondering, Norm, if you can just clarify this just to help me understand it. Can you explain again why it's inappropriate to present the result as a reduction of 11.6% as opposed to a more modest 2.4% in the fatal and injury collisions per 100,000 population? I didn't quite understand how you got that.
Okay. At the time that the strategic road framework was developed, obviously there was a goal set. And we discussed and debated whether that goal should be based on absolute numbers, you know, there were 500 collisions and it dropped to 480 or whatever, or whether you factor in the growth in population. And I'm not going to deny that there's an argument, perhaps, for factoring in the growth in population. And I also agree that when you're comparing to other communities, municipalities, that's really the only way to do it, okay? No problem with that. The issue that we have is that when the framework was developed and approved, it says, specifically, it says, although it may initially appear modest, the goal, it says the Halifax Regional Municipality is growing, and as a result, so is congestion, a 15% reduction, which was the original proposal. Based on today's population is a greater percent reduction after 5 years of growth. So the implication was that the kind of, you know, if it had gone to 17 or 18%, that was recognized. But it was left at the 15%, it was left at the absolute number. And whether the next iteration changes that, and I guess that's for those who are developing the next iteration, but we think it's totally inappropriate to have set a goal that recognized that there was going to be population growth, but the goal doesn't factor that in explicitly, and then, you know, explicitly present a measure that factors in that population growth. We just think that that's inappropriate to do. And based on our calculations, you know, I guess staff would have to confirm, but the number that we have on the absolute numbers is 2.4%, as opposed to the number that they presented in the report. And we just think that that's misleading and inappropriate, given the goal. Was the goal right or wrong? Well, we could debate that forever, but it is what it is, and you should measure against what it is, in our opinion.
Thank you.
Does that clarify an answer?
Absolutely, that does. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Purdy. Vice Chair Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Norm, it is always a pleasure to see you here chatting with us and giving us valuable information, and a big shout out to you and all the volunteers who assist us throughout this municipality to create safer streets, in particular in school zones and the Crosswalk Flag Program. You know, I just talking to teachers recently about how they appreciated the crosswalk and the flags at Madeline Simons in Hammonds Plains. Now, my question to you is about education. And I recognize that it would be difficult for you, I think, to have this same kind of candor with the Provincial Minister of Public Works. You know, over 50% of our roads in HRM are provincially owned, managed, and it's very difficult to advance public safety initiatives on those roads. So as we saw with removal of the crosswalk in Hubbards, for example. So when I think about how we can do education more effectively, considering we really only have control over 50% of the roads, at the same time, we have residents who are used to not having public safety initiatives on their roadway. They are used to not having reduced speeds. They're used to not having stop signs, three-way stop sign or four-way stop at an intersection. And so it seems like a lot of times we're fighting to educate the public, and at the same time we're going against the grain. And so from an educational perspective, I truly appreciate that. I think we got a failing grade, Mr. Chair. Was that? Yeah, we failed. And so I'm wondering if, you know, if this is something that you also take to the provincial minister or deputy minister of public works to say, hey, listen, you know, it would be great if we had an even balanced approach to pedestrian safety across the municipality, but that is just not the reality in HRM.
Thank you. And thank you for the positive comments on our efforts and the results. Very much appreciated, and I will make sure that they are passed on to the rest of our society. With respect to your 50-50, I think you got to be careful. It may be 50-50 based upon kilometers of roads. I don't know, but I think we're talking about road safety, so we need to know, you know, is there a higher proportion of collisions in the HRM roads than the provincial roads? So I just observed that it's not necessarily the amount of kilometers of roads. With respect to, and I will also say that I had a meeting scheduled with my MLA, the Honorable Mr. Hallman, and a representative from Public Works. It was scheduled for a couple of weeks ago, the focus, but I'll raise this because the meeting got deferred because I had COVID. The two issues I specifically wanted to discuss with them was the SOT thing and photo radar and all of that kind of stuff, which
good.
I know that you guys are great supporters of.
Yes.
But I wanted to get our data to them. And the other one was when the Traffic Safety Act's going to be proclaimed and brought forward. So those are the two that I wanted to get in front of my MLA. He's invited to represent, it's not the Deputy Minister from Public Works. With, respect to education, it's a tough one. I think you can educate a lot of people are still going to ignore it and not pay attention. I don't think that's a reason not to try. And I look at, we produced, thanks to the funding of Heads Up Halifax at one point in time, a brochure. It's a little, fold-over brochure. You've got a link to it in the material we provided to you. We gave out like 6,000 hard copies to schools. They went to schools, et cetera, to parents of schools. Nothing's perfect and nothing covers everything, but at least it was an effort to do something. And I understand the budget constraints that got rid of Heads Up Halifax. And personally, I didn't think Heads Up Halifax was very effective.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean you kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and you don't try and do something else. And having a monthly, this is, intersection month and 5 bullets, to me, that's not education. You have to be a little more, proactive. I think each of you, maybe you could have a regular monthly education piece in your newsletters, road safety. And I know that sometimes things do get put in there, but maybe it is a section in everybody's newsletter that says, this is what an unmarked crosswalk is.
Right.
Because so many people don't know. And, this is how you, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I think it's like, did away with Heads Up Halifax and that's it, nothing.
Right.
And if it's a pillar of, which everybody says it is, or one of the key components, you can't just do nothing. I think it's incumbent upon council to do something.
Well said, Norm. I know I'm out of time, but I do want to say thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Cuttle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So the education component, I completely agree with the fact that we got rid of one program, and it wasn't necessarily because we didn't think we needed a program. It's because the effectiveness of that program wasn't proving itself. So I'm just, I'm wondering, I think you're right, from the municipality and the way we do education is very much through pushing out announcements, but something like this might require more of a hands-on in schools. I know that there used to be traffic safety brought to schools. I don't believe that's happening anymore. I'm wondering, in terms of an education program that could be effective, what is there a model that exists in another place that you think would be a good template? Is it something you think the municipality should do, or is it something that we should contract out to organizations that kind of have the focus and the capacity to deliver? Is it something the police need to bring back into the schools? I'm just wondering, if you have a model of success for an effective education program.
I haven't researched it, and I'm not aware of, good benchmarks from other communities, et cetera. A lot of them do similar things with PSAs, and they get attacked on them the way some of our Heads Up Halifax things were. So I'm not aware of anything like that. I think, I think all of our focus on road safety is been on schools and, or not all, but a significant portion, and rightfully so. I think and I know there's 140 schools, it's hard to get somebody to go in, but, talking to home and school associations, getting the schools to put things in their newsletters. I think that there's a way to work with HRCE to, do some things. And also, I guess my other concern is this reliance on social media. It seems that the communication area of HRM relies on social media. And I can tell you from personal experience in our household, 3 out of 4 of us do not have Twitter or look at Twitter. There's Facebook just doesn't do it. Emails doesn't do it. There's got to be multi-pronged approaches. And I know people don't want to send paper out, and that certainly was an issue during COVID. So I don't have the magic answer but when I was part of developing Heads Up Halifax, we had a number of good discussions between staff communication, traffic staff communication, and the public. And I think that should be resurrected, and, a group should go off and try and figure something out and come back and say, and I think part of that is benchmarking against other communities. So I don't know if that answers your question well, but I personally don't think education is the biggest key to road safety. I think it's very, very important. I think all the pillars are important, but I think engineering, I think enforcement has a bigger impact. But I don't think that's a reason to discard education. And I think that the public here, they just don't know the rules of the road. People do know what speed limits are, and they ignore them all the time too. So I just don't know how successful, ultimately it will be, but that's not a reason not to try.
All right, thank you.
I'll just speak very briefly from here. Always a pleasure seeing you, Norm. I will say to the committee and to you, I think education starts with updating the driver's handbook, which has not changed since 2005. So if you go on the website of Public Works, it doesn't talk about any of the new things that, like a bus lane or a bike crossing. None of that is actually online. So if someone does decide to reference what does that sign mean, I'm not unless they're a traffic engineer, they may not be able to find it, or they might have to go to another province or state's website. So I think that's where that needs to start. But thank you so much for coming. Appreciate that. And we're going to move on so you can get back in the audience and enjoy us going over the next couple items. The next item on the agenda is 12.1.1. Councillor Cuttle brought forward the information item on traffic speed for school zones 30 kilometers per hour. Councillor Cuttle.
Thanks. There's no motion here, so I just speak to it. Is that how we work these? Okay. Yeah, so hold on. I brought 2 up here. I have 2 things up here. Let me get the right one. There we go. Yeah, so I brought these information items forward because I think, just as we just heard from Norm, pedestrian and cycling safety in our city is an ongoing issue, which we continue to need to work on. And there were a few things in these information reports that I get asked about all the time from my constituents and from my residents about, can you not reduce the speed limit to 40? Can you not reduce the speed limit to 30? Thinking that we have the power and the ability to do that. And I continually say to them that, we don't have that ability. We need to apply to the province. And I just thought this was a good opportunity to bring this report forward, daylight it into the public, have this conversation, and kind of reiterate, what it is that we're allowed to do or not allowed to do and why. The one piece in the report that was of interest is that several requests have been made to the province in relation to posting speed limits below 50 kilometers on roads under the jurisdiction of the Municipal Traffic Authority, and that these including a request to amend legislation to reduce the prima facie speed limit from 50 to 40, and a request to allow for blanket approval to post 40-kilometer speed limits on all local roads. These requests were all denied. So, it continues to put us in the position where we're putting applications forward on an ongoing basis to reduce speed limits on a street by street case, which takes up staff time, which takes up, putting in the requests, waiting for a reply, then, changing the speed limit if it's approved, or in some cases, in my communities, I have streets that have not been approved for reducing the limit to 40 kilometers. So it's this ongoing battle. And there's a community I have that has, it's 50 kilometers, and that's kind of where it stayed. And one of my issues is actually with buses going through residential neighborhoods at 50 kilometers an hour as well. And even though I know it's the posted speed limit, and if we ask for the stats, we'll see that, yep, no, they're following the speed limit. Having like big vehicles like that move through our residential streets it's intimidating. It is, it's scary, and the big vehicles going at 50 kilometers an hour actually look like they're going a lot faster, even though I know the majority of them are probably going 50 kilometers an hour. So I think one of my questions going forward is, even if we can't reduce the speed limit to 40, on residential streets, can we mandate buses to go 40 kilometers an hour, just to slow the pace of things down a bit and to make it a friendlier environment? A lot of these neighborhoods I'm talking about don't have sidewalks, so you have kids walking on the road. We've talked about how we want to make some of our residential streets, safer for all users. If we can't reduce the speed limit, can we at least look at reducing the speed limit of the vehicles that we do have control over, as one way of trying to calm things down a bit and make it feel safer and calmer. I don't know if there's any staff that are here that can speak to this. I think the other thing that was interesting in this report was about permanent 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limits. I know this has been brought up before at this committee and at other committees, that we cannot make school zones 30 kilometers an hour permanently. It's only if a child is present that people are required to go 30 kilometers an hour. But that's very subjective and isn't really reaching the goal that is intended by setting the 30-kilometer-an-hour limit. So again, I just thought this was important to make public, have this discussion again. It is something I hear about from residents all the time about, why can't we have 30 kilometers an hour? We even talk about it at the Active Transportation Advisory Committee, even though I think most of the people on that committee know that we don't have the ability to do that. So anyway, that's, I just want to bring these forward and have that discussion, and I don't know if anyone else has comments about this, but thank you.
Well, so first we'll go to Mr. Rigi to kind of address what he knows and what he would have to find out about the 30 or the fleet speeds.
Thank you, Dave Rigi, Executive Director, Halifax Transit, through the chair to the committee. Generally, something I have to take away. I think I can think of some challenges in trying to, have two different levels of speed limits and enforcement and all that sort of stuff. But it's something I never really contemplated would need to take away and talk to my team about.
And I do want to say to the committee, because Vice Chair Lovelace is on the list, but we do have a presentation from Lucas Pitts for the road safety plan. It sounds like these discussions are kind of joined. So, we'll go to Councillor Lovelace, but we may want to have Lucas come forward, make his presentation, and then have a broader discussion. So, Vice Chair Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll just be really quick. I think one of the things I continue to see is an effort from staff to address how unsafe it is in our school zones. So while I appreciate that there is effort and there is funding, it is very frustrating that we continue to do this work and it's not working. So an example of this: last year, staff initiated the painting of the word school across the roadways at the beginning of school zones. And then staff came back and said, yeah, it didn't really work. No, it didn't change driver behavior. So, okay, tick that off the list. We tried that. And then here we have flashing beacons pilot and, to address school areas. I have been asking for 3 years now for flashing beacons on White Hills Run. So it's nice to see that staff have acknowledged, maybe we do need to make this a little bit more easier for drivers to see that there's a school zone. And at the same time, this is behavior-based. It's behavior for people to slow down and care about not hitting a child or dog or person on the road. So, I appreciate that, we just keep ticking off the list of the things that we've tried. I just would honestly like to see a much stronger effort. And to kind of going back to what Norm said, this is about education. How do you change behavior? You educate people, and quite honestly, you find them. You find them seriously so they recognize, the risk that they are entering into if they're driving 80 kilometers in a school zone, for example, or parking on crosswalks, or, the list goes on. So I guess my point is, and I look forward to having a longer conversation about this, but, I just feel like these trials, it is getting beyond frustrating that we are not meeting the mark for pedestrian safety in school zones. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There's nobody else on the list, so I'll ask Mr. Pitts to come forward and lead us in our discussion on 12.1.2, which is the Strategic Road Safety Plan 2023 Annual Report, which is why all of our friends who aren't on the committee from Council are here today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Lucas Pitts, Director of Traffic Management. I have a quick presentation just on the overview of this year's road safety report. So I will just get right into it, I guess. So in 2022, we had 5,157 collisions within our right-of-way, 787 fatal and injury collisions. That equals a rate of 163.8 per 100,000 of our population, and that is an 11.6% reduction in fatal and injury collisions from our 2018-2019 baseline. 2022 was also the second lowest number of fatal collisions since the plan's inception, which is also an encouraging statistic. So this is our curve for trying to hit our 20% reduction. As I said, it's about a 12% reduction. I'm just going to use this quick opportunity in the presentation to address Mr. Collins' comments about the per capita versus the absolute value. When the plan was set up, as everybody is aware, our growth was near zero, and our growth is exceptional right now. And so the decision was made about 3 years ago to try and include that growth in our statistics. I think it would be extraordinarily difficult, given the growth, to make that 20% reduction even close to meaningful. And so that was the rationale for making the change there. So here's a curve comparing us to some of our peer municipalities. They're mostly not updated. You will sort of hear about this when we bring back the new road safety iteration, that most communities are about a year behind, if not 2 years behind, in sort of aggregating their data like this. And so while we're on this curve, nobody is keeping up with us, so it's not really a like comparison at this point. One thing I'd like to mention, though, is it's challenging times in our roadway, and it's challenging times, I think, across North America and Europe. And well, we ticked up just a tiny bit this year compared to last year, but still down from the baseline. Portland, Austin, Minneapolis, Amsterdam, they're all up as of last year. I don't know if it's, we're all still getting back to, I read the other day about travel at the airport, and it's still 90% at pre-pandemic levels, right? So every year there's more students, there's more tourists, there's more people walking our streets, and more people driving in our community. And so I'm not sure if that plays a factor. Certainly there's a lot of conversations that there's this post-COVID anger out there, and people are driving more aggressively, but that's just anecdotal stuff. I have no proof of that. I think this is another really helpful slide because it does separate our provincial roads from our municipal roads. And you can see in terms of fatal collisions, the grand majority of them occur on the provincial roads. The injury collisions, that number is much smaller, but much like the collisions on the fatal and injury collisions on our roads, the provincial numbers are up year over year. And actually, I mean, it's hard because the numbers are small in our community, but so they're right quite substantially as a percentage, but up not as substantially if you look at the raw numbers. So this is a breakdown of the fatal and injury collisions in all of our emphasis areas. As you can see, intersection related is up a little bit. Bicycle collisions are up a little bit. Impaired driving is stable, pedestrian collisions are up, distracted driving down, young demographic down, and aggressive driving down. I'll use this opportunity to point out that we did a quick comparison of where we were last year to where we are this year in terms of the vulnerable users, so the pedestrians and bicyclist collisions. We are actually down 23% compared to last year's numbers, so this year is trending a little bit better. I'll also add, as part of the conversation, that there's two pieces here that, you know, when we do engineering improvements in the roadway, those results are not immediate. You know, it takes a couple years for those results to start showing up. And you know, secondly, that the enforcement piece is another huge piece, obviously, in terms of what's happening. And Councillor Lovelace, you were talking about the schools, and as somebody that's also involved with parking now, you know, I can tell you that the number of emails I receive is, you know, up through the roof in terms of just people behaving badly in front of schools. And there's not much we can do on an engineering front in that regard. It is just gross misbehavior. And, you know, hopefully I can make this public, but Councillor Morse emailed me today about, you know, we did the no right turn on red at Joseph Howe Drive. We're getting a lot of emails about the delay in traffic for sure. We're not getting any support for that move. But now, apparently, people are just going in the left lane and making the right turn on the no right turn on red. You know, and so outside of enforcement, it is very difficult for us to stop that kind of behavior and from an engineering perspective, right? So people that are going to behave badly just easily move around that. So just to highlight some of the 2022-23 projects, I mean, there's not much different than you would probably see every year in the speed display side, and some new RA5 crosswalks, speed cushions and raised crosswalks, the corridor speed management program that was just talked about. Where we're still in talks with the photo enforcement with the province, and I can comfortably say that's not really going anywhere at this point. Traffic calming in school zones, the enforcement piece, and we have an intersection pilot project in evaluations using an outside consultant. So this just, I won't necessarily go through all this, but this is just our completing engineering countermeasures. And, you know, I continue to try to highlight whenever I'm up here that we have a very small team and we are doing an awful lot of engineering work every year. And we tend to spend every cent that the council has graciously provided us for road safety. This is just shows the breakdown on the different countermeasures that went in. So on the road safety improvement budget, you know, we're up to $5.5 million, and again, that just highlights council's commitment to improving road safety on our streets, and that's up quite substantially from our 2019-2020 budget. So new projects in 23-24, additional high visibility crosswalks at signalized intersections, and we didn't end up getting a federal grant to help with that program. Traffic calming on 81 streets. We have the new traffic calming app. If anybody has seen it yet, it's quite exciting. Left turn traffic calming project, schools going traffic calming, where we're coming forward with a protected turning movements plan. We've created, as Mr. Collins identified, we created a new external stakeholder committee. We ended up sending out, I think I told you this before, but I'll reiterate it here, we sent out 23 invitations and we had 3 people accept. So the committee's quite quite small, unfortunately, but we did reach out to as many groups as we possibly could, and we will continue to reach out to them. But as of right now, it's disappointingly small. So going into 2024, as everybody knows, this is our final year of the first iteration of the framework, and so we were preparing to bring forward the new iteration. We also plan on bringing back to council a review of the 2018 to 2023 framework, assess overall successes and shortcomings, identify improvements or strategy. That should be in front of TSC sometime this fall. I just reviewed the draft the other day, and we had the discussion with our external road safety committee, and we've collaborated with all our internal partners and external partners as well, and put together a pretty good document there. And then a development of the new 2024 strategy, which will include our vision statement, guiding principles, focus areas, measurable performance indicators, and that will be here in spring 2024. And I'll give you a warning that it's going to look a lot different than what this one looked like, and hopefully council will support it. And that is it for my presentation.
Thank you so much for that. That was a lot of information very quickly. Let me get back to the speakers. So we'll start with Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Pitts. It's a great report in the sense that it's like the format, the information, the flow. It was a great iteration in terms of giving the information to people. I even like the appendix at the back where he basically just took all of the open data and threw it in there for people to do some analysis of their own. For future iterations, and I don't know if you've ever seen the old reports we used to get until we stopped them on the vehicle pedestrian collisions probably about 2 or 3 years ago. But I'll share one with you if you haven't seen them, because that kind of information would be good to just incorporate that into here as well. And including things like type of road, geometry of road, whether or not it's, because when you go onto the open data and you can look at the dots and where they are, it's really difficult because you could have one intersection, for example, like Oxford and Quinpool, and you'll see one dot, and when you click on it, it gives you like 52 incidents over the last 4 years. And so sorting through all those, so there could be ways that we can better incorporate more information to make it a little more transparent for people and to give a little more data so people can dig a little deeper without doing the extraction from open data and analyzing it themselves.
Just real quick through the chair. I agree. This is a living document, and our intent, again, we only have 4 people on our road safety team, and it's a lot of data. One of the things we are moving forward with in the new year is it's a piece of software that almost every other community in Canada has, and we do not, and it provides that level of analysis for us. And as we move through that process and get that software going, you will see an incredible change in how we can report out on our data and how we update the web page, and we're moving towards a new dashboard and everything. So that's all part of the new road safety strategy, but I appreciate where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, you can even include some of the older information. I know our 2018-19 baseline is important for us to measure because that's when the goals start. But if you go back to 2014, that was the high. If you look at vehicle pedestrian collisions and that sort, I think we're down like 40-50% from those highs. At least we were in 2020. We're a little bit up from where we were, but still we're reduced considerably. And in 2015, 16, 17, we did put in a lot of measures that impacted those. So I mean, accounting for all the work we've done, even pre-2018-19, could also help people realize we used to be way worse. And we want to get there. In terms of just what Mr. Collins had said, and you address the population, and I think that's important because we had pretty anemic growth previously, 1%, 1.5%, that was a good year. And we had 4.3% last year, over almost 20,000 people. I think we're getting about that many, it looks like maybe this year as well, although things have slowed down lately. So having it on a per pop basis allows us to really see what the absolute number is. I'd like to get your thoughts on collecting other information. So I've looked at some other Vision Zero cities, and they will go out either by video capture or by person with a clipboard. Look at exposure. And so it's one thing to say, you know, we've got X number of collisions in certain kind of roads or in this area, but it's also important to look how many cars and how many pedestrians were in that area, because if you have 4 collisions in an area, but only 4 people across the road, that's 100% of those people got schmucked. But if you have 4,000 people walking across the road and only 4 people got hit, that is a marked difference. And that's going to be way different on a road like Quinpool or Spring Garden or Oxford Street or down, you know, South Street or Coburg by the universities. And so what do you think about I know you say a small team. Is there a way for us to get that relative sort of data to see what is the exposure in certain areas and, you know, what are the, you know, because if you have 4 collisions at one, 2 at another, you would say that 4 intersection where 4 incidents happen is less safe. But if 3 or 4 or 10 times the number of people are crossing there, relatively, it's actually more safe. And so what do you think about collecting that kind of data? How could we do it, if we could, given the current resources?
Through the chair. Yeah, again, I think we would need the software I'm speaking of to sort of help us bring that all together. I mean, we do traffic counts, and we do have our camera program as well that feeds into a lot of the modeling work, and we do near misses as well as part of that camera work. And so I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you look at the top 10 lists, and obviously the Armdale Rotary is substantially higher than everybody else, but, you know, every car in the city goes through the Armdale Rotary. So is it actually worse than, you know, South Park or South and Roby, right? It's a great question, and I don't have the answer. I mean, we you know, it's just, I was trying to pull some of the 2023 data for this presentation, and it takes us, you know, 2 days to sort through all the Excel data just to get it. And, you know, that's one staff working on that just to pull that all together. So we need some help to get better on that front, but what I can tell you is we will get better on that front.
Yeah, my time is up, but I'll come back another round. Just very quickly on the Armdale roundabout, since you mentioned it, the new RFBs that were installed in the last year have made a tremendous difference. I get comments all the time from people saying how much better it is now.
And not just walkers.
Yeah.
Drivers saying,
'Cause they can
thank
see
you for
people.
putting those there, including my mother-in-law, so thank you for that. We'll go next to Councillor Cuddle.
Thank you very much, and I totally agree. That one on Shabukta by the Music Academy there, that under the trees, like that for me is one of the best ones, because that was such a dark, terrible crosswalk, and those flashing beacons make a huge difference. So, yeah, look, thank you so much. I think this is really exciting. When I go back to 2020, when the new council was, you know, just, you know, getting going, there was a lot of discussion in our strategic priorities for this term, a lot of discussion about the importance of traffic safety, pedestrian safety, making our roads safer for communities and for people and for all road users. So, you know, this is really important work, and I feel that this strategy is actually mentioned in our strategic priorities, and so it's really nice to know that a new strategy will be coming forward next year, that it is going to look different, and you know, and I think that's exciting to be placing that emphasis. I understand that your shop is very small, and we're asking a lot. So, you know, I think given the importance of this, I would say, you know, probably think about what do you really need to move the mark on some of this stuff, because, you know, we have said it is a priority for us. In looking at the report, there's a couple of things that, you know, kind of really stood out. One was looking at the split between the provincial roads and the municipal roads. Of course, on our municipal roads, we have a lot more people, a lot more pedestrians, a lot more traffic, a lot more cyclists. So, you know, it's not surprising that in some ways we see that injury collisions, or all collisions, is higher in the municipality. And it's also not surprising on the provincial roads that the fatalities are higher, because those are mostly highways traveling at higher speeds. And I'm guessing more vehicle-on-vehicle collisions than pedestrian collisions. I'm just wondering if you could provide any insight into the types of fatal collisions that are happening on the provincial roads compared to the ones that are happening on the municipal roads. And also, I just want to note back to the rapid flashing beacons that we all like so much, that your target for 2022-23 was 20, and it says that you've completed 58. Which is, makes me really happy. I'm still waiting for one on Ocean Breeze, by the way, in Herring Cove, but I assume that's coming. That's coming soon, because you've been very busy. I'm just wondering, how did we get from 20 to 58 on that particular item, and what can we be expecting in the next year? And my final thought here is about communication, because we are doing a lot. You are doing, you and your team, you're doing a lot to address the issues and some of the priorities we set out. And I think we need to communicate this. So, with this road safety report, is there going to be some communication out to the public? I know. Often it's like pushing out, and it will be done through social media. But I think it's important that people know we're working on this, because I can speak, at least speaking for myself, I get a lot of calls. It's probably, it's in the top 3 issues that I hear about from residents on a regular basis is about traffic safety for pedestrians, for cars, for bicycles, and it's high on people's minds. So I really think it's important that we do communicate this. Thank you.
The Chair, on your first question on the provincial roads, yes, it's very much weighted towards vehicle-on-vehicle. Last year, I believe they had 1 fatal injury collision in terms of vulnerable road users. This year, it was 9, but those numbers are obviously very small compared to our numbers, and so it is primarily vehicle-on-vehicle. And as you mentioned, it was they are traveling at high speeds, and that does lead to a more serious accident in a lot of cases. Again, looking forward to the new road safety strategy, we're really going to start to try and parse that data out, especially on the intersection fronts, because again, we tend to, as you look at our 10 quote unquote worst intersections, or whatever you want to call it, the numbers aren't huge, right? And so it's interesting how much everything can shift based on, if the provincial numbers are way up, it can make us on our roads look really bad, because it doesn't take much weight on their sides to really tilt their percentages. And so, again, when we reframe the road safety strategy, we're going to start parsing that data out. I know in December, when we were counting down to getting close to having to report on the numbers and whether we're trending down or trending up, or we're going to get to our 20%, we had 2 different medical accidents, and where somebody in the vehicle suffered a medical issue, which led to an accident, and which led to a number, I believe one was a fatality, and there was a number of injuries, right? And that really actually moved us like 3%, was those 2 accidents. So, so we're going to start, to Councillor Cleary's excellent point, we're going to start making this more visible, what's happening, where it's happening, why it's happening. And so, stay tuned. On the RRFB, my esteemed colleague, Mr. McIntyre, is going to help me out here.
Through Mr. Chair to the councillor, the number of our RFBs installed for 22-23, the previous budget year, if you remember, I believe that was the year we came forward with the budget adjustment, and we increased the number that we were going to install. So the number you have that indicates the proposed number was probably before we went to the BAL adjustment. So we did have somewhere between 40 and 50 identified for upgrades, existing locations for upgrades, but then we also added in the locations where we added new crosswalks with our RFBs. So that's how we ended up with the 50 some odd number that you're seeing in the report here.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. And so we'll move to Councillor Vice Chair Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Boy, this is interesting stuff. Really appreciate the work that you're doing. I know at times it feels like an uphill battle, just the forces of people's behavior, bad behavior. and it's quite shocking at times what people will do. And just because they disagree with, the dropping of a speed limit, that's okay. They're gonna go faster than what the speed limit is posted and what it was posted before. It just amazes me what people will do. But I want to dig into the short-term target for the 20% drop in fatal and injury collisions a bit, because I feel like while 12% reduction is, that's good, but at the same time, we can see that the fatalities are mostly on provincial roads where we don't have the authority. We also don't, we can't reduce the speeds on these residential roads or these highways, Highway 3, for example. We know that the roads in particular don't necessarily have power poles or streetlights, which causes that whole other issue with animal collisions, the deer, the moose, the bear, the so on and so forth, which we have in my district. And yet at the same time, I'm looking at the numbers for the young demographics, which I appreciate you putting here, because if we think about the rate of the young people in particular, the inability of the municipality to influence engineering or controls on provincial roads. And then you look at the high rate of fatalities on provincial roads. Lucas, I think you know where I'm getting at this. I don't have enough information to know what's going on and what it is that we at the municipality can actually do to address new drivers in particular, which are very vulnerable, especially if they are ingesting alcohol and drugs in particular. So I'm trying, I don't feel like I have a good picture of what's actually going on here and what controls we can actually put in place. Can you speak to that?
Through the chair, you're absolutely right. It's very difficult given all the confounding factors within the municipality, and especially because we continue to push for things like photo radar, but our hands are tied on what essentially almost every province east of. I just got back from Quebec City and I couldn't believe the photo radar. It felt like it was every 500 feet there was a sign for a radar camera, right? And so the enforcement piece is a huge piece of this, and I will take this opportunity because I think it's a good opportunity that the invitation was extended to both the HRP and RCMP to come to this meeting. The RCMP was in training and they couldn't come, and Greg Joseph from the HRP was planning on coming, but he was up all night dealing with a critical incident, so he emailed me this morning and said unfortunately he couldn't come, and he just wanted me to just state that part of the decreasing SOTs that you're seeing in the report are mostly because he has short staffing within his traffic enforcement department, and that continues to be a challenge for him. We are working. I think I gave Roddy a high five the other day after we left one of our brainstorming sessions for our road safety strategy, and we're working very closely with both police departments. I think we're pretty excited. We're coming up with some new approaches to enforcement as well, and again, that'll be all in the new plan. But I think we're going in the right direction where we're going to start parsing some of this data out, so you don't have these questions, and then the enforcement piece is going to be more strategic to help us address those things that we see when we parse out this data. So,
well, I think that's what for me, this is what I'm missing. I'm looking at that young demographic and thinking we're not actually moving the needle on this. This is not good. These are terrible numbers, and in particular, when you have young people who are impacted in very serious collisions, that's going to impact them for the rest of their driving life, right? So potentially, unless it's a fatality. But I just think that is a target for those new drivers that we need to do a better job on and understand what controls we have and what controls we need to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We'll go to Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you and the committee for allowing me to sit in today. I have a couple of questions. One is a compliment. When you have information on a new crosswalk or a new street light, I think it would be great to share it with us as the counselors so we can fan it out to the community to let them know, great work, HRM. Anyway, and I have a couple of questions. What is the criteria that decides whether there's an overhead crosswalk or a street light? And if there is a crosswalk installed, what is the cost to change it over to a street light? My other question is, and you might not have enough data on but has the advanced crosswalk indicate, has the advanced walking indicator for pedestrians made a difference in our traffic fatalities? I like them personally because it gives them a head start. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, I may need my much smarter colleague to help me on the criteria, but I will say this, we have, so on the crosswalk, so we essentially have, in terms of, upgrades to an unmarked crosswalk, we have the RRFB crosswalks, and then we have the RA5 crosswalks, which are the bigger ones. And then sometimes we have a number of sites with a half signal, I believe, which is essentially a traffic signal, but activated by the pedestrians, right? And so typically the RA5s, the half signals, are on our bigger roads, 4 or 5 lanes, where there's high volumes of traffic traveling in at higher speeds. Okay. How we differentiate between the RA5 and a half single, I don't know if we have like a true, we just kind of look at it, and if it's
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, I'll jump in here and help Lucas out. So, and he's correct. So the RA5s and the half signals we typically install on your larger multi-lane roads, and mainly because you've got vehicles moving in multiple lanes in the same direction, so you want to make sure all the lanes are aware that there's a pedestrian crossing. Moving from one to the other, say from the RA5 to the half signal, would primarily depend on if we've got some collision experience, if we've got some demonstrated history of non-compliance with, say, the RA5, then we may consider upgrading to a half signal. Or we might just go right to the half signal, depending on the conditions. And if it's further away from a regular signal, it's more appropriate to put that sort of a treatment in.
Yeah, my concern is the crosswalk doesn't always make the cars stop. I've seen them in one particular area go around a gentleman in a wheelchair because they wanted to pass. So, I think a stop sign would at least, or a stop light would at least make them come to a complete stop. About the walk indicator, the advanced walking indicator, do you have any data on that yet, or is it too early?
Chair, I think it's still a little early for formal data on that one, and so we're working through the data as part of our lessons learned report, and certainly that'll be a consideration.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Studdard. We'll go to Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lucas, and for your team in this work. And you've certainly done a lot of work in District 4 over the last year in particular to make our crosswalks a lot safer. So really, really appreciate that. Those RRFB flashing crosswalk lights are amazing, and they're very helpful. So thank you for that. Question about the evaluations that are used as to the effectiveness of the countermeasures, as Norm pointed out in his report. I'm wondering, since a lot of the engineering projects are actually placed on streets that don't have high collision data, how are the effectiveness evaluations made? How do we know whether they're being effective or not? And just concerning the traffic calming, I mean, when I campaigned, that was the biggest issue from door to door. I was amazed at the fear and terror that people had that someone was going to get killed. Like literally, someone was going to get killed. So as to Councillor Outhitt's point, how do we know that traffic calming hasn't in fact prevented someone from getting killed? Because absolutely that is always a risk when we have kids playing on the street and cars just plowing by. But to that point, I had a resident in my town hall. He has two ways to get to his home from the grocery store. One is on streets that don't have traffic calming, and one is on streets that do have traffic calming, and it's the same kilometer distance. The route on the traffic calming is a much higher gas mileage for him. The slowing down, the brake, the gas. So he was wondering, how does this fit in with our climate plans? And so, like all of these considerations, right? How do you balance them all when making these decisions? I'm wondering too, now, just kind of looking at all of these considerations, if some of the traffic calming budget would be better utilized in building more sidewalks, wouldn't that make streets safer as opposed to the bumps? Because even hearing from, our first responders, it is very difficult to be in the back of a big truck and going over those bumps. It's hard on the back, it's hard on the neck, it's hard on everything, and it does slow down response time. Would the money be better utilized in building sidewalks or crosswalk enhancements? Crosswalk enhancements are crucial. The raised crosswalk, the RRFBs, just making sure, as to Councillor Stodder's point, that cars they stop for our pedestrians. And okay, I think that's all my points, but very thankful for everything that you are doing. Just wondering about the piece of the traffic calming and the effectiveness and how that's even evaluated.
So through the chair, on the traffic calming pieces as part of the AO, certainly we record the speeds before we put the traffic calming in, and then we record them afterwards. So we do have a piece.
So that's the only criteria, whether it's effective or not, is if the speed is lowered. Not if collisions get lowered.
Well, I mean, there's, to Mr. Collins' point, there's no doubt that there's less accidents on residential local roads. There's even less accidents on corridors as compared to intersections. So you have those two factors sort of playing into that as well. So no, we can't officially measure whether we didn't get an accident, after the fact. And in all honesty, that would take, again, like, it's just, even if we were to try and, isolate that kind of data, we would need 5 years, 10 years of data to really make any sort of judgment from a true data perspective on whether you were seeing impacts there, because again, it would be so infrequent, you need just multiple years to sort of analyze whether it went up or down. So on the climate change piece, I will just add that the intent of speed humps are not to accelerate like crazy in between them. So it is traffic calming for the whole street. It's not traffic calming for the 10 feet around the speed bumps. But
no, he said he was very careful to accelerate slowly.
Yeah.
But it was still a much higher gas.
So yeah, there would be certainly, I know mostly for me, I don't brake when I go over speed humps. I just decelerate as I approach them, right? So to each his own. Certainly there'll be issues where they're certainly might be burning more gas because they are, accelerating and decelerating more and braking more. On the third one, it's somewhat of a loaded question from staff. I think for staff, I think traffic calming is very popular. I think the perception of safety is very important to people. And I've been doing this a long time, and these programs tend to be very popular for that reason. The flip side around to sort of support Mr. Collins' comments, when we're coming forward with a protected turning movement report, we're coming forward with the action plan for the 10 most intersections with most collisions. When we get into pure infrastructure work in the roadway, realigning an intersection, putting in new signals, new poles, new cabinets, those projects are $1.5 million. we only have 2 million on top of what we spend on traffic calming. And so I think there is a decision point coming for council in the near future about whether the budget is going to go up to support the traffic calming program and the hard infrastructure changes that are being recommended through these reports, or whether to reallocate budget from the traffic calming program into the more hard infrastructure projects. So I'll leave that as apolitical as possible.
Thank you.
Well done. I will give you an A+ for that. We'll go to Councillor Morris.
Thank you. Look forward to that report. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the intersections. Lucas, I just want to say thank you so much for what happened at Lacewood and Dunbrack. That was one of the high priority intersections, got the full treatment. I think LPIs and left turning controls and zebra stripes, and there were a few other things. Anyway, it seems to have completely changed that intersection. People feel a lot more comfortable driving through it, walking through it. It's made a total difference there. So although I appreciate the speed humps I have received in my district as well, I can see that some of those infrastructure changes at the intersections are really valuable. So I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about where the next phase of that is going. And also on the 40-kilometer-an-hour neighborhoods, how are those determined, and why does it take so long to get the designations, and where are we going next with that? Because I had asked for 40 kilometers an hour designation for one part of my district, and it was dropped. And I just don't understand quite what happened there, or what's next. And finally, if I could, when changes are being made, either at intersections or in neighborhoods, and it affects police enforcement, what sort of work happens in advance of a change with police, between you and your team and police? Thank you.
Through the chair, on the intersection work, I think what I could say at this point is that you have the top 10 list in the report. You're going to see a lot of overlap there, and so a lot of the bigger intersections piece will overlap with a number of the intersections that you see in that report, or in that table. Again, it's interesting data, because our data is fairly low. Is that you drop the number of accidents by 2 as a criteria on that table, and that table expands to 25 intersections. So, our intent is to work through these first 10 over the next number of years with support from council and support for funding, and then while we're doing that, to collect data while we're doing that work, to then resort and then address the next set of intersections. So more details to come, for sure. I'm going to pass it to Roddy, I think, for the other questions.
It's 40 kilometers an hour neighborhoods. Where is that headed, and why is it so difficult for staff to move that forward?
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So the 40 kilometer per hour program, we don't at this point have a kind of one set, this is how we select a neighborhood. Some of them come out of the traffic calming requests. It could be areas that are very low, rank very low on the priority list. So there may be an opportunity to look at applying to the province for 40 kilometer per hour speed limits there to help address some of the issues there. Behind the scenes, there's actually quite a bit of work involved in getting those put together, especially if you've got a significant number of streets in a neighborhood. Staff need to assess the streets. We need to make sure that we've got, province requires a representative amount of speed data. If, sometimes we need 1 or 2 streets in the neighborhood, and as long as the rest of the streets are very similar in characteristics, they don't require us to have speed data on all of them. So we can submit based on that. But then we also need to come up with a signage plan, because under the MVA, if there's no sign, then it's by default 50. So we need to try to figure out a way to get the signs in areas so that we can at least rely on the fact that it's signed for 40 to make it official. Then we go through the application process of the province, which, in fairness to them, they do turn them around, fairly quickly. We've never had to chase them to get a response. and then it's getting it into the sign shop. And a lot of times it's a significant number of signs that need to be then manufactured and installed, and a lot of times also requires post. So it's just a lot of the physical infrastructure that's needed to get it into place. That's usually where the delay is.
Okay, thank you. And just regarding police, if there are changes being made to the roadways, are the police involved and get a heads up about those particular changes?
Through the chair to the council, yeah, we work with both the police and the fire department on what's happening in our roadways. So, yeah, and we continue again through the road safety committee. I think, in all honesty, I think, you know, our relationship is much stronger than when I first started, and I think we're doing some good things and coming up with some good ideas between the two of us. So, three of us, I guess, with the RCP.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morris. We'll go to Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you both for being here. So a couple questions. One is related to the speed display sign program. So is that fully integrated with traffic management now? Because most folks didn't know that HRP kind of was, both of you were working together to make that program work. So is it now fully integrated with traffic management? Okay, I got some head nods there. So the question I have is just how has it changed now that you're fully taking care of that program, and do you feel that it's working more efficiently in that sense? And the other one is related to the speed cushions. So, you know, again, thanks. I know there's a lot of people involved to say thank you to, but thanks for Robie Street, because we know that was a long time coming to get that worked down the northern part of Robie Street. But one of the issues we're having with the speed cushions, and I see this every day because I live on the end of Robie Street, I see this when I'm either driving or on the bus, that there's drivers who go into the middle lane, and you mentioned earlier about you can't sometimes change unfortunate drivers' behavior. They'll go into the middle lane to avoid the cushion because with your work with transit, they mentioned that you can't have the fully, I don't know what the technical term, it's broken up to allow them to be able to go past them, but cars are using that to avoid the cushions to not have to take the millisecond that it takes to go over the cushion. Anyway, so I'm just wondering if there has been some thought in terms of engineering on maybe ways to avoid that, but understanding there's many other obstacles in trying to achieve there. The other question is mid-block crosswalks. Do we still have the same criteria of not really entertaining that unless there's a development happening? Or have we started to think about the possibility of those being allowed in certain circumstances outside of developments? And then the last one is the criteria for crosswalks for future. So I know that the way that we look at crosswalks is what is the usage, what's happening around it, the patterns, and then we'll either decide through traffic analysts if those things are allowed or not. So I didn't see it in the report just around talking about crosswalks for future. So are we going to be in a place where understandings for, and I'm just making this up, for example, on a block there's going to be 1,000, actually I don't have to make it up, on Almond Street, the new development that's happening across from the post office and Shoppers and Rona, there's going to be about 700 units, I don't know how many people, and there's the crosswalk that where CNIB is, but then the next crosswalk's all the way down by the intersection of Almond and Robie. So we couldn't ask for a crosswalk now because the usage is really not there because there's nothing to cross to, but soon there's going to be a huge development. But I know that we don't use criteria of future, we use criteria of now. So I'm just wondering if that's thinking of how do we, are we going to, or are we already thinking about making crosswalks in places where we know there's going to be usage in the future?
So through the chair to the councillor, on the SDS program, yes, as we nodded, we are in full control of the program now. What we've done, I believe, Roddy can know me if I'm wrong, is we've allocated 2 signs to each district, and we are moving those signs around either based on need or request. Our request from all counselors. The list is quite long, so we're not going to have any trouble finding places to put them. But typically, we are collecting. We want to keep them in place for 3 to 6 months when we first install them, and we certainly. It's laborious given the size of the city to go out to the fringes of the city and move them around more rapidly than that. So it is a little bit onerous on staff. So that's the sort of the program we've come up with. I think that's we think anyways is fair and balanced and allows good widespread use of the signage. On the speed pillows on Roby Street.
Oh, pillows. Okay, I can't keep up.
Okay, all right, no, you call me cushions, I come from a different province, so.
Okay.
So you were right, so I'll say that in public. I was wrong, so.
Oh, okay.
We do our, I think you hit a lot of the nails on the head there. I think it's hard to balance, I think, a lot of the competing needs and the cushions they're in because they're more effective or better for emergency vehicles and buses and things like that. And when we get into designing them, we obviously do our best to space them out in an appropriate way that works for the larger vehicles that we are trying not to impact. And certainly, I think in some circumstances, smaller vehicles can make their way around those things, unfortunately. So, but we're always trying our best, obviously, to situate them in a way that can't happen, but sometimes that's not possible. So mid-block crosswalks, Roddy did confirm. We do those all the time. So if you have a request, feel free to fire it in. I would say that about the future crosswalks as well. I know a number of councillors have reached out for crosswalks, and we've put a lot of new crosswalks in this year, and we will continue to do that as well. So, we certainly consider the demand piece, but certainly, when there's a future development, that's part of our consideration as well.
And that's great there, because that wasn't the mid-block. I had a feeling, but I wasn't sure. But in terms of the criteria for newer crosswalks, that is totally different than what happened in the past. So that's good to know. So now you're going to get a few requests from me. Thanks for telling me that.
You're at time, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you.
Okay, well, we like that. Thank you very much. We'll move to Councillor Outdet.
Thank you. You can get extra time if you say thank you, right? Thank you, and thanks for the presentation. When we talk about the proactive crosswalks versus reactive and developments and et cetera, I've really seen some examples lately of that in West Bedford with the new schools, et cetera, and I really can't say enough good about Jill and Sylvia and whatnot, and the proactive, and Roddy, you involved, the proactive of getting the crosswalks, the signage, the crossing guards and whatnot in there before school opened, which was my big worry, that we were going to wait till see whether they're doing them proactively and there for day one in opening. And I was pleasantly surprised by the work that the team did, and things have gone quite well, and I do appreciate that. Related to that, crossing guards, we voted at council to bring them back into HRM. And it wasn't clear to me if it's going to go to public safety or traffic or some sort of hybrid. The last I heard, we hadn't brought them back in because there was nobody to sort of run the program. Brian Palmer was still running it off the side of his desk. What's the latest on crossing guards and who they report to, if you've heard anything? And last but not least, the LED speed signs. I've got a couple of them in Bedford that are there, and I've got a couple that are there sort of permanently, if you will, as part of traffic calming. But we used to be able to use our district capital to get more of those, having 2 per district, where I could think of a dozen streets off the top of my head where they might be useful, and I think they're $4,000 or $5,000 a pop or something. Are we back to the stage where we could, as councillors, say, listen, instead of leaving that one there 3 months when there is a problem and we're moving it around, that we could say, here's the $4,000, put a permanent one in? Have you heard a ruling on that lately? So thank you, and thanks for all you and your team do.
Through the chair to the councillor, the crossing guard program is with the police still, and so all the funding runs through the police, and I'm not aware of any attempt.
We did vote to take it away from police and move it in-house.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't know where that's ended up with it.
I don't think it'll end up in traffic management,
Yeah,
just
okay.
because nobody's talking to me about it, so.
Okay, all right.
It's usually a sign.
Okay. All right.
On the speed display signs, I think I would recommend, if you want to expand the program, a motion through council to consider, so staff can come back. As I said, and honestly, I made that comment intentionally, is that it's very difficult, again, for our staff, because we do so much in terms of signals and cabinets and all that work, to send people out constantly to move signs, right? And so, you know, if you go, we're two per district now, we go to 5 per district, and we're moving them every month. It's a very, very laborious process for us, especially because, again,
Well, I'm
it involves-
suggesting 5 per district, but I'm not suggesting you move them.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. And so that's why I would recommend a motion, because I think
Yeah.
we could come back potentially with a program that, you know, maybe we put some up permanent. You know, I get that they're very popular, but I think certainly through the literature, long-term, they lose their effectiveness. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen a piece of literature that says they're effective long-term. You see a small bump in the first 3 months, but you almost always see the speeds come back up once they've been there and everybody's been, you know, they're ingrained, and now people aren't paying attention to them being there. They know they're not. Some people, I think, panic because they think they're going to get a ticket from the sign.
Yeah, well, we can work on that, too.
Yeah, maybe one day, that's for sure. So,
yeah.
you know, if that is something that councillors, you know, wish to pursue, I would urge a motion, and that way we can sort of best sort out what we would be capable of doing. Because even if they're permanent, you know, they still go out, they still break, we still have to repair them.
They're high labor.
Yeah, so it's just a lot of work for us, and again, our team is fairly small, so we'd have to sort out what that looks like, and probably press you for a staff member or something like that,
All
so.
right. Well, it's something to think about as we head into budget. Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll speak from here, if I may, on crossing guards. We voted to move them out of police, but then the new CAO quite rightly said, give me a chance to figure out how we're going to manage it. I think it's probably going to go to public safety, and you'll be spared. I did see to Councillor Cutler's point, I saw the RFB installation folks. They are actually doing Spring Garden and Brunswick today, and we all had a good laugh because the base was in, and I came and pressed it, but the button's not there yet, so I'm like, what's going on? And we all had a good laugh. But that should be done by the end of the day, and I know they're out there. They always come later into the fall than any of us would like, but that's, you know, needs must. I heard you talking about the behavior of people at schools. I had a 27-year veteran of the police force call me and tell me after they did enforcement at one of my schools, they did a information and ticketing blitz 2 years ago, that it was the worst, most abusive thing he'd ever dealt with in his entire career. And you got to think about that. And that means that people really need to check themselves, right? Like, there is no, I'm just stopping in this no parking and getting out of my car for 5 minutes when you're blocking the sight line to a crosswalk that's being used by hundreds of people to get to school. You are the danger. Your car should be towed. Doesn't matter if you're late for work, you know. And so we need to take the message to them and try and do some education, as Norm was saying. So on the fatal collisions piece, one of my questions is, so the provincial data includes 100 serious highways in HRM, or is it just provincial roads? They are provincial roads, but if it doesn't even matter. Go ahead. We don't know.
Wait one second.
It includes 100 serious highways? Hi, back there. So my suggestion would be to further break that out, because I think people like Councillor Lovelace and Councillor Cuttle would like to know what's happening on my streets versus what's happening on the 100 series highways. I think that's, I mean, they're both something we should track, but I think I'd like to know the difference on that. The enforcement, it's not just about the photo radar, it's also about getting the tickets raised, right? The tickets are inconsequential right now. And we were here when I still worked downtown in a bar, and the tickets were $15, $7.50 if you paid it in a week. This is back in the 90s. That's why they raised it to what it is now, because it was cheaper to park in the street and risk a ticket than to park in Scotia Square, and we are back there again. And so hopefully they will listen to that. But I'll just close by saying we know that, like you talked about the medical accident, medical-related accidents causing the numbers to go up and 2 percentage point shift. We know it's going to be a sawtooth, and what matters is the long-term trend, and it has to be a truly long-term trend, and it's hard to even measure a long-term trend because we're only just coming out of COVID impacting all the numbers. And I wanted to support what you said about that, because to me, next year and the year after and the year after are where we're going to have some real measurement. I do think, though, that Councillor Cleary, if we broaden it out to have more than 5 years data, maybe that would also help to establish that long-term trend. And the jerkiness of the sawtooth is what it is. We can't take credit when it's slightly better than we thought, because then we have to get pummeled when it's slightly worse than we hoped, right? So we really need to see that long-term trend come out. So we have 2 more people coming on the, and I thank you very much for this work. I think it's excellent. So we have 2 folks coming on the second go-around. So we'll go to Councillor Cleary first, then Councillor Stoddart. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just also, because I've been sort of going through the report trying to find it, but the other thing that you could include as well is when you look at, traffic calming, the street or type of street, I mean, there could be a list provided. It's, if you look at the capital reports, we have them in there, and it could be maybe collated into here, because this speaks to what Norm Collins spoke about earlier, is the majority of, traffic calming is on residential streets, but actually, the last few years, we've been spending more and more money on collectors. So I'll give you a couple examples. We've done traffic calming, this past tactical traffic calming on Oxford and Norwood. So when you're going down Oxford, we have the precast curbs and the bollards to extend the crosswalk. That's traffic calming. It's pinching the lanes there, letting people know that actually illegal. It's just 1 lane instead of 2. Most people treat it as 2 lanes each direction. And so Osborne is another great example. Speed cushions on Osborne, and so, or speed tables on Osborne Street. And so that's a collector as well in District 9. And so we are spending money on those. So if you could just maybe incorporate that and maybe speak to that if you want to. The other thing is and I don't know how, in terms of education and enforcement, we do this with the tools we have, even with things like photo radar, red light cameras. On Monday, I was riding my bicycle up to Mount St. Vincent University, and this will be maybe important to Mr. Rigi as well. There was a bus that was stopped at a bus stop and was just about to start pulling away. And as I heard this loud crash, I looked over, and a cube van was hitting from behind and sideswiping the bus. And, I was thinking to myself, I hope no one was getting on or off the bus at that particular moment. And when I looked at the driver, when I heard the crash, I could see this very puzzled look on his face as he was pulling the wheel to start swerving. Probably, don't know what the police investigation ended up, but probably distracted driving, not really seeing. Is there a way that, we could, by collecting the data, inform, HRP or RCMP, like, where are the hot spots for things like, distracted driving, look at your cell phones, doing all, it's everywhere when you look around. Because I don't know, I remember hearing stories about police actually renting buses, coach buses, and they would be on there driving through traffic, because they're a good vantage point, you could have 1 or 2 people on each side looking down, and they were radioing ahead to where they had a checkpoint, and they would then pull over all those vehicles and give them tickets for using their cell phones while they were driving. Is there anything we can do to partner with RCMP, HRP, to figure out where these hotspots are so that we can prevent these or at least deal with reducing some of them, because they seem to be at epidemic levels?
Through the chair to the councillor. It's funny, back when on the West Coast where I come from, they used to place one plainclothes police officer on the bridge and then another one farther down the road. And so he'd just stand there and radio when because it was probably about 200 feet from a light that was often backed up. And of course, you're not allowed to be on your phone even when you're sitting in traffic. And they would bust everybody that came through there. So you are thinking like we are thinking as staff. And so I had mentioned that we were working on different strategies with our colleagues in the police force. And certainly this hotspot conversation is exactly what we're looking to develop. And and implement it. It saves them a little bit on resources, so they're not just scattershotting everywhere, and we can work together to develop, targeted locations and times and things like that to help improve the categories where we see deficiencies, right? So that's our intent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Making comments like that, I'm like, he's not running again. We'll go to Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I won't be long before you. I just have two questions. What is the distance between speed signs in residential areas? I'm asking that because I've had residents call me saying they've gone this far and they've passed a couple of blocks and they don't see a speed sign. I'm just wondering, is there something I can tell them or suggest?
The chair to the councillor. I think my colleague, Mr. McIntyre, sort of touched on that in that, 50 kilometers an hour is the default speed limit, and so there are not signs for 50 kilometers an hour within our residential neighborhoods in very many cases, if any. Only when we switch to the 40, then we have to go put up all the poles and all the signs to delineate the 40 kilometer hour zone. So I think that's why, you're seeing, your citizens are seeing gaps in the signage. And
Okay. Sorry about that, I missed that. The other question I had was, my district has two distinct areas in HRM. We have Beachville Lakeside and Timberlake, and then Clayton Park West and Wedgwood. So is it possible to get two signs in BLT and two signs in Clayton Park West? Well,
yeah. Through the chair to the councillor, I'll have to discuss with my staff to figure that out. If you can make a request via email, then we can add it to our list. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Never mind, Tim. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Councillor dropped off, so before anyone gets back on, I'll say thank you very much for presenting, both of you. Great to have you here, and you're released until the next time we need you, which is not too long from now, Mr. Pitts. So that concludes our information items brought forward, and that brings us to the agenda of the meeting with 20 minutes to spare. So we're probably going to go over time, and I'll just let the committee know that. We're going to move to 1311, Halifax Transit 2023-24 Q1 KPI reports. Ms. Hughes is here to run us through a presentation.
Thank you. Patricia Hughes, Director of Planning and Customer Engagement at Halifax Transit, and I'm here to present the first quarter report for 23-24. And as a reminder, Q1 includes April, May, and June of 2023. At this time, there were service reductions in place, the same ones that were put in back in February and remain in place today. Despite those service reductions of about 4% of service, ridership was approximately 97% of pre-pandemic levels during this period. Before jumping into the data, a bit about what's coming up for us. We do have some significant service changes happening November 20th. The first set are related to the Moving Forward Together plan and some structural route changes. Those will be happening for 4 routes. One, relatively minor, is the Route 28 in Bears Lake. I guess it looks minor on a map, but it does include the schedule changing pretty significantly, and that's because it's changing to go into the new health facility in Bears Lake, effective November 20th. So minor routing change, but anyone who takes that route, please check your schedule because all of the trip times will be different. The more significant structural changes are on the routes 51, 56, and 72. So that's in Dartmouth, and a lot of the changes are Burnside and Dartmouth Crossing. So encourage people to check those out. This does mean extension of services up to the IKEA area, up Cutler, and also some truncation of services off of Akerley. So some important changes there and some different travel patterns for folks. Also included in the November service changes, about a quarter of the service that was suspended back in February will be reinstated. This means 55 trips that are currently missing from the schedules are going back, and that means that 26 of the routes that had reductions will go back to full service, which is great. In addition, 18 routes are going to undergo schedule adjustments to improve quality and reliability. We call this schedule adherence work. which is a bit jargony, but what that means is where we're seeing increased congestion and the trip times aren't sufficient, the schedules will be adjusted so that they'll better reflect what's really happening, and people can have a better sense of when the bus will be there. In addition, we have a number of routes now impacted by the Cogswell redevelopment project, and so there'll be schedule adjustments to accommodate the detour routing that's happening. So overall, a fair number of changes. Going back to the data, overall boardings continued to rebound back in Q1, up 27% compared to the year before, and as I already mentioned, at about 97% of what we're considering the normal or pre-pandemic levels. Revenue was 93% compared to that 1920 pre-pandemic baseline. Average daily boardings continued to rebound from before COVID. And you can see here with the different colored bars, the blue ones are weekdays. Weekday boardings were still trailing the pre-pandemic conditions back in Q1, but weekends were strong, with Saturdays being about 110% of pre-COVID levels and Sundays being about 114%. So definitely some good growth on the weekends. What's not shown on this chart, I guess just as a bit of a verbal update, our September ridership did exceed our 1920 levels. So here we were at 93% on weekdays. So September we actually hit 100. September 2023 was 101% of the September 2019 ridership. And just a little bit about that as a bit of a sneak preview, we're also looking at where that ridership is and what's different, and have travel patterns changed since the pandemic. And I can report that when we look at, it's not entirely a straight comparison, because a lot of routes and structures have changed since that time, but our corridor routes are up about 30%. From September 19 to September 23, so really strong ridership on the corridor routes. Express routes are up about 12%, and that is despite the fact there are 53 trips missing and about a 21% service reduction. They're still up about 12%. Where we had decreases, we're seeing decreases, or I guess areas where there's still room for growth is local routes, rural routes, ferry, and regional express. So a lot of our growth has been in the corridor routes and the expresses. So we were going to dig into that more and bring more information forward as time goes on, but that's our first glance at the September data. Passenger overload incidents have remained, they were high in Q1, actually quite unusual for Q1 to be this high. We've only typically seen these kind of numbers before in the fall with the back to school and the increased traffic. This may be in part due to the service reductions. So looking at that a little closer, 83% of the overloads occurred on corridor routes. So that is where we've seen that high ridership growth. And even though I previously spoke about the weekends having a lot of growth, 79% of these overloads are on weekdays. So it is on weekdays where most of those are happening. On-time performance has been trending down as ridership and traffic has increased, now falling well below that target of 85%. Although this is a decline from recent periods, it is somewhat representative of where we were before COVID. So we do have schedule adjustments to 18 routes, as I spoke about, coming in November to try to adjust and assist with this metric. We are seeing this congestion and challenges continue to increase, and this fall has been challenging, so we expect this to be an ongoing challenge, and we'll have to be working on on-time performance going forward on a regular basis. Loss of service represents the total number of scheduled bus service hours that were not completed. So in the first quarter, this total loss of service was 721 hours, which is 0.4% of the quarterly revenue hours. And I guess important to reflect that back in February with the service reductions, that meant that the ad hoc service cancellations that were happening were able to be mitigated. Customer service calls resolution times have returned to consistently above standard in Q1, as well as in more recent months. Accessibus provided 10% more trips in Q1 as compared to the previous year. The conventional bus mean distance between failures fell just below the target this time of 9,000 kilometers. Bus maintenance costs were $1.37 a kilometer, which was 9% higher than the budgeted maintenance costs. We think there are some costs that fell to Q1 that will mean that Q2 was a little bit lower, so we're waiting to see how that looks after Q2. A new metric this time, perhaps a bit timely today, is that the collisions involving transit vehicles occurred once every 21,400 kilometers driven, and a preventable collision occurred once every 38,500 kilometers driven. So we'll include this in the report moving forward. And the final metric to share with you today is recruitment and retention. So this graph shows the number of operators entering and exiting the operator position. And as you can see, the last 5 months there have been positive numbers, and we're continuing that trend. And that is all I have to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Lots of good information there. We'll go first to Councillor Cuttle for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the report. I find these reports really valuable, and you have lots of good news to share this time around in terms of returning ridership on our express routes and our corridor routes, and that's great to see. But with that, comes new challenges. It's never a dull day in transit, I don't think. But I'm wondering about the overload. So is it possible to get a breakdown of where those overload incidents are happening in the network, and what is the plan? Because I think about Heron Cove Road. I know that is one of the routes where overload is being experienced. The impact this has on residents who rely on transit is really significant. So whether you're a nurse trying to get to your shift at the hospital in the morning and you're late, one, because the bus drives right by you, and then two, because we're missing our on-time marks, that really impacts not only the person who's late for the job, but the person who's looking to be relieved from their shift. So there's domino effects when our transit system isn't reliable. It affects the riders in significant ways. Another recent example I had where a bus went by a woman who was catching the bus to get home to pick up her child from daycare. For those of us who've had kids in daycare, you can't be late for that. You can't be late because you're going to get fined a significant amount of money, and because you have staff at those daycare centers who also need to go home and also need to meet their families. So when this becomes an issue that's not even just a once-off, but a reoccurring issue, it's again, the domino effects that occur just don't make transit a reliable way for people to get to work. But in a place like Spryfield, where we have one of the lowest income populations in the municipality, there is no other choice. Transit is their only choice. It's critical. It's not a nice to have. There is no other choice. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to how we're going to deal with the overload situation, like what's the plan going forward, as well as the on-time performance. I mean, I know Heron Cove Road has a functional plan. It's several years out. It's not completely funded. We can't wait like 5+ years for a solution to this. So I'm wondering, what can possibly be done with on-time performance, and what is the relationship between transit and traffic authority? So when you're having on-time issues, do you go and talk to Lucas and the traffic authority team to say, hey, what can we be doing to maybe better streamline the traffic, or are there some creative solutions to the congestion to help the buses move forward? Because if there's congestion, it's not just the people sitting in cars, it's the people sitting in the buses who are impacted. And I know we have plans for BRT, and I preach that all the time to people, saying it's coming, fingers crossed. But in the meantime, what can we do to address these concerns?
Sure, I'll attempt to respond to those questions. I think I'll start with the last bit, the traffic authority and, the on-time performance. Certainly, we're working with our colleagues in Public Works and in strategic transportation planning all the time. When congestion is increasing, the only way to have the bus move through those areas quicker is transit priority measures, generally. So we do work together all the time, even if it's just signal phasing or the way light is working and the timing. We're talking to them constantly about that and looking for areas to improve. But I think the ultimate solution as congestion increases would be, the dedicated transit spaces or lights to get the priority is really the only way to move ahead of that congestion. In terms of the overloads, we haven't provided a breakdown of where we've provided the routes. We can map that. I think one of the challenges with the overloads that is perhaps more challenging to show graphically is how long the overload occurred. So in some cases, the bus is quite full the whole trip. In other cases, it might overload 2 or 3 stops, and then enough people exit that then more passengers are able to board. So it's got a few different dimensions to it that make it a bit challenging, but we can certainly work on that and come back with that. In terms of what is the plan for overloads, I think we have some short-term ability in terms of there's still some routes under the Moving Forward Together plan to be implemented. We do have some Bedford Expresses for next year that will hopefully take a little bit of capacity from the 90, and so I think we do have some short-term things. But I think overall, it's a challenge of the city is growing and there's a lot of demand for service, so transit service would need to continue to grow to meet that demand. I think it's that bigger conversation if that's BRT or, I think that almost all of our corridor routes could use a fair bit of more frequency, but that is very resource intensive. So it's that broader conversation about, how we grow over time and how quickly we need to do it now.
Thank you. And I just want to say, I wouldn't make the assumption that it's well, I know bus priority would make a huge difference. I do think it is worth putting heads together and sitting down and looking at some of the root causes of it and seeing what other solutions can come up in the meantime, because we can't wait that long to make it functional.
Thank you, Councillor Cuddle. Councillor Oated.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Patricia, for the presentation. Councillor Cuddle touched on a number of my concerns, but first of all, again, the 97% is good news, and I think we should all be happy about that. You touched on the 90, which I was getting bombarded with lately because of overloading and standing room only or not being able to get on at all. And we complain about suburbs being too car dependent, and then we have people wanting to take the bus and either can't do it with any degree of sort of comfort. So I'm glad that you're looking at that. The 194 I've also had concerns about, and Dave, I got a note from you saying that I guess that's one of the things going to get better after the 20th is the service on the 194, so thank you for that. And you touched on this for Councillor Cuddle, but one of the things is the overloading and how often do you sort of just sit down and say, well, this route is underperforming? I'm going back to the wonderful days of the Sambro Loop, where we have people standing all the way from West Bedford, and we had 14 people a day or whatever using the Sambro Loop or whatever. How often do you do that sort of reconciliation to say, and this isn't nice, it isn't politically fair and pleasant and whatever, but to say, we have routes that are underperforming while we have people that can't get on a bus or they're standing for an hour. So how often does that happen? And on these underperforming versus the overloaded areas? Because we can't just wait till the Novembers and the whatever other months where we do mass changes. I think we have to do regular tweaking as well. And there was some discussion about some of the buses running into the ferry terminal there, the other, not the main ferry terminal, it's going right out of my nose. Woodside, thank you. Ferry being underutilized. So how quickly can we pivot and put them to somewhere else in Herring Cove or West Bedford or wherever, Larry Utek, that isn't being used? That is being overused, rather. And the one other comment, it's just, and I know if Paul were here, he's brought it up before, when you talk about customer service and customer support, you've got some great people there. It's not a criticism of them, but it's not a resolution time, it's a response time. It hasn't been resolved, because everybody that I've talked to me in the last little while is talking about the problem with the 90, for example, the 194 may be different. It hasn't been resolved. You're aware of it, you've gotten back to them and told them there's nothing you can do about it, but that's not resolving a situation, that's responding. And I'm wondering if we should look at changing that terminology for the KPIs, because the response time to me is different than a resolution time. Not to be picky, but to be a little bit more transparent, perhaps.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll take that feedback regarding the language with the customer service calls and go back with that. In terms of the underperforming routes, I think it's something we are looking at consistently, and so recently we've added a bit of color coding in this report to show, green, yellow, red, and in terms of their meeting standard. I think I guess as part of the Moving Forward Together plan and the 5-year service plan, we talked a lot about, which routes might be removed, which areas may have lower frequency. I think we haven't in recent years been making any service reductions that weren't previously part of public consultation. Right now we do have those because we had to reduce service for operational reasons. So I think that when we have to make those, temporary reductions, we are looking at performance. Part of the challenge is many of the routes are performing well. So I think in this report, all of the express routes are meeting standard as an example, right? So the ones that wouldn't be, if they were on the table, was Route 178 and 179, which are temporarily suspended and are not coming back in November. They'll be phased back in, at the very end, if at all, because those were the ones that were underperforming, right? So I think it's something we're constantly looking at and monitoring. In terms of actual removal of service or reduction of frequency from a community, we've I think left that to the larger planning exercises like the 5-year plan and at a minimum the annual service plan, so there's an opportunity to be very transparent before there's those reductions. But certainly I think will be an important conversation going forward.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll now move to Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hughes. I really appreciated the color coding of the underperforming and well-performing routes in the table, this report. I think that's a great addition and highlights for us, to Councillor Outthit's point, about keeping our eye on the ball as council, which routes are doing what they're supposed to be doing and which ones are not, and why, and either how we can get the ridership up or move those resources to better performing areas. So thank you for that. I also want to pick up on where Councillor Cuttle was on the overloads. It's one thing to acknowledge they're there, and they're substantially higher. So, I mean, they do ebb and flow. But I went back and looked at 2018, 2019, 2020 reports. And, of course, the quarter one isn't always, it was a couple of years ago, the highest one. But I find it troubling that we have such a high overload right now on those really important routes. And digging into that, I think, is really important, because the integrated mobility plan says we need to mode shift 30% of our trips to sustainable transportation, transit, cycling, walking. And transit by far is going to be the way we're going to be able to move the most amount of people, given the size and the topography and the typology of our municipality. And COVID really, as it did in a lot of other places, kicked our butts when it came to transit. And so basically we lost almost 3 years. We're only now back up to where we were in 2019. And I saw something from transit just this past week or two, how we're well ahead now of where we were in 2019. But had things not gone sideways with the pandemic, we should be 20, 30, 40% increased in ridership, given where we were on that trajectory before the pandemic. And so we need to make up time. Climate change is not going anywhere. In fact, it's accelerating, not stopping. And one of the best things we can do to help mitigate climate change and help people adapt to it, especially with the rising cost of living, because, by taking away the necessity of someone to own a car, that's a savings on average of 10 to 11,000 according to the CAA. And so I had to follow up on this. So I'm teaching this semester on Mondays and Wednesdays at lunchtime at the Mount, and every time I go to the cafeteria, Wanda, who's a wonderful person at the cash, she takes the number 8. She lives in Sackville. 3 times in the last week, she has not been able to get on the bus she needed to get on because it was overloaded. And it drove right by her. Driver was nice, he waved at her, apologized. But nonetheless, she was late for work 3 days in the last week. And so this is, to Councillor Cuddle's point, impacting real people, especially people at the front lines of our economy, who usually can't afford other options. And so if we want that mode shift, and my fear is, that goal was by 2031, and we were going in the wrong direction. Just to remind people, when we had it, when we set the integrated mobility plan goal, we had gone from, I think it was 75% commuting by car to 77% commuting by car. We were going in the wrong direction as we were setting a goal to try and get back down to 70 with 30% and more sustainable, which is, at the time, was seen as not a very ambitious goal. Now it seems like unbelievably ambitious to get to that by 2031. How do we do it? How do we, because transit is going to be a big part of that, and if people literally can't get on a bus and they're waiting in a bus stop, we need something. So I put this out now. It's October the 26th. We have budget coming up. If we need more resources for transit, now is the time to start sticking that in the presentation so that we can get that. Because if it's a matter of 10, 20, 30 more drivers and buses, we should plan for that. Just kind of an implicit question in there. Or any comments that you or Dave would like to make?
Question? Is it fair to ask that of staff? Is there anything you'd like to say to that?
I'll say this is all great feedback as we're working on preparing our annual service plan for next year.
Excellent, thank you. We'll go to Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for this presentation. I sympathize with Councillor Cuddle's dilemma, but I was just wondering, when there is an overloaded stop, and it happens regularly, if not daily, is there any ability to send one of those extended buses during that time? I'm just pulling that out of the air. I just thought, that might be able to hold more people, and then the next shift, maybe the driver could go back to a regular size bus. Just throwing that out there. Thank you.
That's a great question, and we do get this question from the public quite regularly as well. So we do have 47 articulated buses, which is the 60-foot buses, and I would say we probably have more than 50 requests to deploy them in a certain spot at a certain time last week is the challenge. So they are deployed strategically based on where we know there are the greatest volumes to mitigate the overloads as much as possible. So it is a bit of a moving target, but they are used, I think, as effectively as we can. And so we do appreciate that feedback when customers or passengers are calling and requesting them in certain places. It lets us take a second look and see where they are and if they can be moved around. But it is an issue of a limited number of them.
I would expect that when you do your evaluation that you would look at areas such as Councillor Cuddles, because, if you have a transit bus passing people by that really need the service, it's not supporting their goal to take the bus, and the next time they may take their car. So it has to be reliable, and they need the room to get on. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor, and that leaves Vice Chair Lovelace.
Thank you so much. And just on that note, I will add that it's not so much about taking a car, but they could be losing their job, right? So we're, again, as Councillor Cuddle said, like having serious implications to life. I continue to hear from people in Hammonds Plains, there's no point in taking the bus because it's full. So they can't get on it, they can't get off it, and with the 433, it's not on time. So when I look at the numbers, I think, okay, the 330, we're doing all right by the numbers, but then we don't really have the true story here. 433 is not on time, so you've got a lower ridership, although it's better than last year. But again, because our population is growing, so as we have more population, we've got more people that are going to be using the bus, but we also have fewer routes and fewer options for people. So at the same time, I'm looking at this thinking, okay, this is good news, but I don't feel like it's telling the whole story. I mean, I guess, Patricia, what I would like to see in the graph is when we look at the weekday peak on-time performance to actually indicate somehow with an asterisk or something, oh, by the way, this is a poor performing route. It is a route that's challenged, either because there's significant overload, 90, or because it's not on time. It's not showing up. And so then we, as we can have a look at this and say, oh, wow, that's a low 50% or whatever, but that's a really challenged route. So it makes sense that it's slow. One, because people aren't using it because they don't trust it. And two, it's not reliable. They don't want to lose their jobs, so they actually can't use it and depend on it. And I think, too, we're challenged on Hammonds Plains Road in particular, where we don't have adequate lighting at the bus stops. Very dangerous to be standing on the side of the road. It's also extremely concerning when people are getting off the bus and trying to get up Lucasville. That's not a safe intersection. So again, people aren't using the bus because it's not a real, safe, viable option for them. And so I guess I'm just thinking if, then I was a little surprised, I guess, about the increase in the maintenance costs. I get, I think it was 9% or something like that. I was actually expecting more. And also looking at the failings kind of dropping, the target of 9,000 kilometers, we're seeing that our buses are falling a bit below, the conventional buses are falling below that 9,000 kilometers for maintenance. And I guess the bigger story for me is thinking about what's the investment that's required to keep those buses on the road to be able to increase the routes. At the same time, I'm really happy to see the bus operators it's like they're coming back. That our numbers are actually increasing so we can increase those routes. And so I feel like this, there's some good news in here, but I feel like it's a bit skewed because as we look at the numbers, it's not really telling the whole story. But thank you for this. This is good information to have, and I look forward to seeing an increase in service at the Hammonds Plains St. Margaret's Bay area, in particular that 330. The park and ride is getting lots of usage in Hubli as well as West Bedford. But at the same time, that park and ride in West Bedford, because of the linkages between the 90, or the lack of linkages between the 90 and the 433, again, people can't really use the 433 to get to the park and ride. From that Lucasville kind of lower downtown Hammonds Plains area. Thank you.
All right, so we have one coming back for a second round. I'm going to speak before we go to Councillor Cuddle from the chair, if that's all right. So I think we have to emphasize what a good news story it is that we're back to the ridership from pre-COVID. I'm on a national board with one of the deputy mayors of Toronto, and they're looking at a $400 million deficit because they're nowhere near this. And so this has great implications for end of year and for next fiscal year, and it's a great relief to me. So let's start with the positive. Wow, that's really, really good and unusual and rare in the country. This is the time of year where I spend a lot of time going and guest lecturing in a variety of programs at Dell and St. Mary's, and more recently in 9th grade and at Armbray. And what I heard from students throughout all those presentations across 3 different programs is, like, the students, because of the UPass, we already saw them moving farther and farther out. They can't afford to rent, especially the master's students who aren't going to be in residence, aren't going to be renting around the university. And so I'm talking to these, young adults in their late 20s who are watching the number 9 go by and they can't get on it and they're not going to make it to class. M-Plans, your people. And so I'm going to say again what I said at the last meeting, but there weren't transit folks here. I think it was in response to a discussion from questions from the public. Just to reiterate to the committee and to council, Moving Forward Together plan already says, the policy of council that we adopted says in section 6.2 that when a route is not meeting ridership guidelines as outlined above, Halifax Transit will consider taking one or more of the following options: modify the schedule where possible, reduce or eliminate off-peak service or reduce service span so the level of transit service provided is more closely aligned with ridership demand, investigate planned developments or public amenities adjacent to the route, consider changing routing, lead a promotional campaign to raise awareness about the route, and if ridership is low over all periods of the day, consider service elimination. And elsewhere in the plan, it says that when we do that, and what we said during the consultation around Moving Forward Together all that time ago, 6-7 years ago, was if we have underperforming routes, we need to kill them off, we need to put those buses on the corridors. And here we are. The corridors are overloading. We need to rebalance the network. And I don't think we can wait for a major consultation on that. I think the policy is really clear. We got to do that. So I know we don't have the riders yet. We don't have the drivers yet for the 178, 179. So it's kind of a academic exercise when you don't have those riders. But looking at that list of underperforming routes, analysis needs to be done because we need to know, can we merge routes? Is there duplication? Is there opportunities for realigning? Are there places where the express buses don't make sense? Are there places where only the express buses make sense? But I think we need to get to that for the coming service year, because really, and I'll say it to committee and council, our choices on this are, we have 3 choices. Leave it where people are being left by the side of the road, raise taxes and put more money into hiring more bus drivers that we already have challenged by getting bus drivers and getting more buses, recommitting resources from underused routes that we already have a driver and a bus for to routes that are overused or oversubscribed, which also, by the way, means we go from having a bus that has 40 or 50 people a day paying a fare to having a bus that's full and all those people are paying a fare. So it has a net revenue gain as well. So we're going to have that discussion during the annual service review, and we're going to have that discussion during budget, because I don't think we can go through a year of leaving it the way it is. I absolutely don't. My one comment and question, or I guess just the preventable collisions per kilometer, I feel like that's also another, it's like there'd be less collisions when everybody's staying home during COVID. So that's another one where perhaps having a benchmark of what the annual looked like in 2018-19 might be useful, because on the face of it, it looks bad, but I don't know if it's really bad, because if we're back to having enough traffic that there's cargo vans all around near where Sean's driving, hitting our buses, like that might have been the way it was in 2018. So I need a better comparison there, but I will just challenge staff when we come to the annual service plan. I think we're going to need some really put some difficult choices in front of council, because I think we've got to make some changes. We can't wait another year, 2 or 3. Anyway, with that, we have 2 people on the list, and Catherine Morris hasn't spoken yet, so we'll go to Catherine Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this presentation. I'm not a regular member of the committee, so this may be a really obvious question, but I'm just wondering how much slack we have in the system, and if every single bus is being used at peak times, or if we have some that are available, or if it is the drivers that are constraining us if we're looking at adding more vehicles to overloaded routes. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would say typically, we would plan and schedule service to essentially use the maximum number of peak buses we could. At this time, the limiting factor is operators. So we do have the capacity to make the November changes and probably some of the changes we need to make last year that we had, or next year, which we intended to make this year. But we are waiting for our staff numbers to increase to do that.
Okay, so we do have buses that are sitting idle at certain times of the day?
Presently, yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
But do we have them when we have, do we have them at the times we need them, though, I guess is the question, right?
We would have some actual physical bus capacity at peak right now if we were running full service, and if we had done everything we committed to or we had hoped to do as part of the annual service plan this year, we wouldn't have any. But because we're not up to that full service level right now, we would have some vehicles available at peak.
Good to know. Great question, Councillor Morris. You should come more often. Thank you for that. We'll go to Councillor Cutler for a second go around.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, you know, this whole thing about the bus overload and people missing buses, you know, it is a serious concern. I mean, you know, I think the point that Councillor Lovelace made about it's, you know, not just being late for work, but actually losing their job or being docked pay, right? If you're an hour late, you're actually not getting paid because you're not at work. So, I mean, this really has far-reaching implications. And you noted that there's some nuance to really understanding this problem in terms of, you know, is it the whole route that's overloaded? Is it just for a period of like a few stops that it's overloaded? You know, where are people getting on? What is their destination? How is all of that working? I'm wondering because, you know, I feel this is something that we need to take action on and we need to make a priority. If the Transportation Standing Committee would consider a motion for a supplementary staff report on bus overloads, detailing the incidences and developing, coming back with a plan to develop actions to remedy the overload situation.
So there's no motion to accept, and we would need to waive the rules to have a motion right now. So my preference would be to either do that next meeting or to talk to staff about what their intentions are for when we do the annual service plan. Because like really that needs to, I think that needs to come back all as one piece. But right now we could do it, but it would require 2/3 on the floor, and also it would probably get redebated, and I'm cognizant of the time. So I'm wondering if we could bring that to the next meeting.
My concern is that our next meeting is, well,
Let's ask when the service plans come.
isn't for a while, and I would have a preference to have this for, so if we're going to consider it in the budget for 24, 25, that we have some information about it.
So through the chair, the annual service plan comes as part of budget, so I think our date's like late February or probably March or something like that, so that's when the annual service plan comes. I think as Patricia said today, I mean, when we're doing an annual service plan, we're contemplating overloads, we're contemplating all the things that are going on. So if the desire was to provide us direction to, you know, consider overloads in annual service plan, I mean, I don't think we need that direction. I think we've got that, and I mean, that's something we would do anyway, and it's been reinforced today. So yeah, in terms of timing, if it's just about information on overloads, I mean, that's going to take staff time to do. But yeah, I guess depending on what the intent was, that, you know, like we're still quite a ways away from presenting an annual service plan.
Well, I think that's the intent, is that we're a ways from presenting this, and it's an immediate problem right now that we've been having for a number of months. So I'm really interested in figuring out how do we take some actions to start to remedy this as soon as possible.
So I feel like I do, just a bit of expectation management maybe. So this isn't actually a new issue. It's an issue that didn't really happen through COVID, and I think perhaps there's been a bit of institutional memory on the part of our riders and all of us, that is a bit of an unfortunate reality of a transit system, that you are going to have overloads from time to time. So it is, you know, it is an issue that, you know, occurred for years. It's something you track. It's something you try to address. But you know, just to kind of lay it out in terms of what's possible in the near term, you know, frankly, there's not a lot, because we don't have extra buses that we can put in service. We don't have, like the articulated buses, the longer buses, like that's something we can look at to see if that can be massaged, can they be moved? But the reality is normally they're being utilized in a place where they're needed. So I just if there's an asterisk to go away and like rush a report back next month or something, there's not really going to be much or anything in there we can say about some sort of extra solution to the problem at this point, unfortunately.
What was the stat of the ridership on corridor routes in terms of increase from 2019?
It was an increase of 30% ridership.
Right. So in terms of this not being
So we're at time, so I'll ask you to wrap up.
Okay, well, I guess my thing is that, I'll wrap up by saying that, while this might have been a historical problem, it's a problem right now. With a 30% increase on the corridor routes, we're experiencing the overloads. Like, we really need to dig into this and to look at a remedy sooner rather than later. We can't keep waiting on this, particularly if it's a problem we already know about. So, I'm at time, so, yeah, thank you, Councillor Cleary. It's like the bus is going right by me. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the motion was, there's no motion put on the floor. There's no one else on the speakers list. So with that, thank you, Ms. Hughes. Appreciate that. And we will move on to our last report of the day, 13.12, School Safe Streets Pilot Project, which is, there's no presentation. Mr. Pitts has remained to answer any questions. If someone would put the motion on the floor, I'd appreciate it. We'll move to Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you. I move that the Transportation Standing Committee recommends that Halifax Regional Council direct the Chief Administrative Officer to formalize the process for a Safe School Streets pilot program with the HRM based on the principles outlined in the staff report dated September 11th, 2023.
Moved by Councillor Lovelace. Is there a seconder? Second by Councillor Cleary.
Awesome, thank
Any-
you.
go ahead.
I am cognizant of the time, Mr. Chair, and I will just say this is a well-written report, completely understand why we need to do this, and I do agree that we have to formalize the process and appreciate staff's work on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I gotta go.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We'll move to Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on this. So if the pilot goes well, what's the intention of the program? Is it to kind of duplicate or multiply with all of the schools in HRM, or how? Because we got schools and streets that we can't do this on. So how is that? I guess what's the intention of the program if the pilot goes well?
Through the chair to the councillor, that will be a decision for council. We'll come back after the pilot with the findings of what happens during the pilot, and if the will of council is to expand the program. I believe there's 137 schools within the HRM. Not all of them would be viable. There was a motion, I think, in the last Transportation Standing Committee to look at the active school travel program. These programs really overlap each other. So I think there's and in fact, we were, council one step ahead of us again, but we were planning a more school-based focus as part of the next iteration of the road safety strategy. And so you've taken a little wind out of our sails here, but, that still will be a priority and they all overlap. So I think there's some good discussions to come, if that's an answer.
That's a good, okay, I'll take that answer. Thank you.
Question's been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Pitts. That concludes our business here today with reports. There's no motions from members of Standing Committee. There are no motions, no in camera, no added items. Are there any notices of motion? Going once, going twice, sold. No notice of motion. Oh, sorry, Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I should just get a little bell. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, so take notice that at a regular Transportation Standing Committee meeting, I propose to move that. The Transportation Standing Committee requests a staff report regarding the removal of Hammers Plains Road from bylaw number S900, respecting the establishment of controlled active streets for streets within the Halifax Regional Municipality. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further notices of motion? Seeing none, the date of the next meeting is November 23rd, 2023. I'll take an adjournment. Adjourned. Thank you very much, Councillor Purdy.